It's now time for The Journal, WBGU-TV's award-winning public affairs program, with your host, Steve Kendall. This is where your community matters. Local people, local issues.
Hello and welcome to The Journal. I'm Steve Kendall. You know him as the Caped crime fighter from television, movies, books, comic books, and new media. It's Batman, and the BGSU Department of Popular Culture and the Ray and Pat Browne Library for Popular Culture Studies are celebrating the 80th anniversary of the Caped Crusader with the Batman and Popular Culture Conference. Joining us are two BGSU faculty members, Dr. Matt Donahue and Dr. Chuck Coletta. I want to thank you both for being here. Talk a little bit about the conference, because it covers a lot of areas that some people are probably somewhat familiar with and other areas maybe they're not. So talk about the idea for the conference.
Well, what we wanted to do is kind of, the department has kind of been revisiting the tradition of setting up conferences related to different topics in popular culture. Okay. So a few years back, folks might remember we did the Heavy Metal and Popular Culture Conference, right. And then we followed that up with the Electric Guitar and Popular Culture Conference. Right. The Popular Culture Library developed one related to romance novels and popular culture, and now we've really settled in on the Batman theme with Batman and popular culture, as it is the 80th anniversary of Batman.
Yeah, right. And we just thought it was a great time to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Pop Culture Library, and we have one of the great collections of comics, one of the largest in academia. In the country, and it would be a good place to celebrate Batman and the library too. Yeah,
because it started out as what, like a pulp, the Batman character was basically a pulp book or a pulp comic book.
Right, it was a comic book, and it was basically based on the character of the Shadow from radio and the serials back in the 1930s.
Yeah, and over time, and as you know, I was looking through some of the topics here, but over time the character evolved in many different ways. In fact, at one point it was actually going to be done away with. Had lost its popularity, but then things changed. I mean, like a lot of comic characters or characters started out serious, then the television series kind of comedic, kind of sort of slapstickish, and now the movies very serious, and the books and the comics very serious. Is that kind of a traditional thing you see with characters like this over our popular culture?
It is definitely in reference to Batman, because it's you know, it is one of those, you know, characters that sort of they're constantly recreating themselves, right? And that is such a current trend in the comics industry. And what we wanted to do with this particular conference was highlight all of that. We wanted to highlight the not so serious side of Batman, and also the serious side of Batman, but also just reach out into all areas of popular culture. So we've got folks, we've got about 85 speakers, and we've got folks coming from all over the world, India, Japan, Germany, all throughout the United States, and then we're touching upon topics everything from television, film, collectibles, the comic book, also the villains. Also, they
sure.
Play,
oh yeah, the big part of it. Yeah.
And the interesting thing is, Batman's been around for 80 years, and he's one of the few characters, comic book superheroes, who's been in continuous publication for that long. It's Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman.
Is that right? Those are the big three. Okay.
Right, the big three. And what happens in popular culture, and Matt knows this as well as anybody, things sort of become popular and they kind of fade, and then they recur. So Batman was very popular during World War II, and in the 50s he was not selling well. In the 60s, the TV show, and then the 80s, the movies, and it's just a cycle of popularity and sort of waxing and waning.
Yeah. Now one of the topics in here now is Batman and popular music, and of course, if you're the TV theme, you know, da 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 da, that's the one that most people remember. But talk a little bit about that, because that's going to be kind of interesting. Yeah, you have Bill Shirk, of course, is the vinyl god of music in the world, I think. But that's an area too, because like most people just think of the music, but the movie music is very moody and very scene setting, whereas, you know, the campy thing from the TV series is the one that got most popular.
Well, that session will be a lot of fun, because of course the great Professor Bill Shirk from the Bill Shirk Sound Recordings Archives and he has such an extensive knowledge, but also just in the Sound Recordings Archives collection itself of different recordings, whether it be little serials that were recorded, and or the soundtracks too. And also it's interesting too, kind of going off of what you mentioned, is going from sort of this almost like 50s rockabilly sounding Batman theme, and of course Link Ray is a guitar player. Link Ray, rockabilly guitar player from the 1950s. He did his own interpretation of the Batman theme and so on. But what's interesting too is that as you get into more of the modern aspects of it, because of course Prince did a soundtrack associated with one of the Batman films.
And even even people associated with the show have done records. There was a record in the 60s. Burgess Meredith and Frank Gorshin did songs as the Riddler and the Penguin. Adam West did an album, which is not great, but he tried. And Bill Shirk was showing me not too long ago, or listening to one of the worst albums of all time, or records. Burt Ward, who was Robin, did a single with Frank Zappa as the as the producer, and it's just awful. But they sold for while the show
because
was
everybody
on.
wanted it. It was so hot at that
That's
point.
right.
And I think that's the interesting thing, because as you said, the character's popularity ebbs and flows and that sort of thing too. And when it's hot, it's really hot. Every media available when that takes place like that. One of the things that we've got a lot of stuff here, a lot of material, but I mean, this is the Life magazine cover of the campy TV series, the Adam West Batman. And I think we were talking too a little bit, Chuck, that Adam West had a difficult time after he did this character. He could hardly get other roles. He was so identified with this character.
Well, that's right. The Batman character was really in distress in the late 50s, early 60s. Sales were so bad that they were thinking of canceling him. And then when the show comes out, it becomes a top 10 rated show for a short period of time. It only ran for about 2.5 years, 3 seasons. But you're right, Adam West got stuck being Batman. Nobody could accept him doing any other role, or he would pop up on a TV show or a movie, and there's Batman.
They would say, oh, there's Batman, not there's,
And eventually he came to terms with it. He would spend the rest of his life at conventions and appearances and popping up on Batman-related projects. But that show was like a groundswell. It was, someone once wrote that the 60s were defined by the Beatles, Batman, and James Bond in terms of pop culture.
And that's pretty accurate, And you think about that too, and I know that one of the things that happened to a lot of television people in the 60s was, you think, oh, he was in that series, it was a huge hit, he must have been wealthy the rest of his life, but that wasn't necessarily the case.
No, prior to the early 1970s, people only received residuals for about 6 or 12 reruns. So the money stopped coming in for him by like 1970, 71. And someone is still making money. The Batman show is on a couple of cable channels right now, and they just rerunning these same episodes over and over again, and the stars receive nothing.
And that has to be tough to watch if you were Adam West or Burt Ward saying, oh my gosh, somebody's still making a ton of money from that.
And they're sort of lucky now that this resurgence of Batman again, there's been a line of Batman 1966 comic books and toys and games and things, and with their likenesses on. So they get paid for that, but for the last 40 years before that, they got nothing.
It was kind of,
and it's so interesting too, because as we mentioned, the television show for folks in our generation, it really was kind of the thing that a lot of people just gravitated to, and it was something that was just such a huge part of the popular culture of that time, and then as Chuck said, kind of going beyond in reference to these kind of resurgences going on as well.
And it was the comic book brought to life. You didn't really see that in the old 1950s Superman show where he was basically fighting gangsters, but here you had people in the costumes, and it looked like a comic book, and it was brightly colored, and you had these stars who would pop up, or as the Penguin or the Riddler or the Catwoman, and it became it was the first show in television history that was in the top 10 for 2 spots. It was on one night a week, then Batman would be put in the trap, and you'd have to tune in the same bat time, same bat channel the next evening to see how he got out of it.
I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, tune in. Yeah, next time.
That's
Yeah,
right.
will this happen? What will happen to? Yeah,
They're putting him in a giant snow cone, or they're or whatever it is, Mr. Freeze.
It was great. It was great theater. When we come back, we could talk about some of the other evolutions of Batman and some of the other things about the conference. Back in just a moment here on the Journal on WBGU-TV. Thank you for staying with us here on the Journal. Our topic is Batman and popular culture, and there's a conference at Bowling Green State University April 12th and 13th. Joining us are Dr. Chuck Coletta and Dr. Matt Donahue from the Department of Popular Culture. Among the things that are going on at the conference, you've got an incredible number of great speakers. So talk about some of the featured speakers that people are going to be able to see at this conference.
Well, we're really excited. We wanted to have a connection to BGSU current faculty, but also BGSU alums. And we're bringing in Mark Sumrak, who's a writer for Marvel Comics, but also very knowledgeable in reference to all things comics. And he'll be doing a workshop on how to create comics at the Wood County Public Library on Saturday at 1 o'clock.
Okay.
And that's April 13th. And then also in reference to BGSU faculty, we have Dr. Jeff Browne from our own department, the Department of Popular Culture, who's just recently written a book on Batman and his connection to popular culture, and he will also be featured.
Right, and then we have a couple of alums, another alum, Dan Mishkin, who was a popular culture grad student here back in the 1970s. And he went on to DC Comics, and he created a bunch of characters who were sort of perking up again in the DC universe. A character called Blue Devil, who's going to be appearing on television later this year, and an Amethyst. And he's really knowledgeable. He's done a comic book on the Warren Report. He's done superheroes and serious topics. And the other person who we're really excited to have is an author named Mike W. Barr, who lives in Akron, but he was one of the most prominent Batman writers in the 80s and 90s. And he created a lot of the characters who you see on TV and in the movies today.
Yeah, now, one of the things too, and with regard to that, you mentioned earlier in that last segment, we were talking about the fact that especially on the TV series, a lot of name actors played these sort of character parts, and the same is true in the movies. A lot of those folks who, like you got Jack Nicholson playing the Joker, and over time, a lot of really great actors and actresses did that sort of thing. The movies and the comics, a lot of the books and things are a lot darker than the television series ever was. I mean, as you said, he's trapped in a snow cone
That's
or whatever.
right.
Okay, that or ice, whatever. The movies got into almost like the psychological part of Batman, and he almost like humanized him in a way that the other thing, the TV series, did not. And that gets into the writing a little bit. So we'll probably get some of that feel for that.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what it is, because the Batman of the 1960s, really wouldn't sell today in the same way.
Right.
The audience has changed. The average person reading a comic book today, well, in the old days, were kids under 12 and 13, and the average person actually reading a physical comic book today is probably in their teens, 20s, and into their 50s. So the characters have to age as the audience ages, and the subject matter has to become a little bit more mature. But the interesting thing is that, yes, the movies can be dark, but there are also at the same time Batman cartoons and comic books and other things aimed at younger audiences. So there's a Batman for everybody out there.
A Batman for every man.
You can go to the store and you can buy Batman napkins and plates and birthday party things, and then you can buy R-rated Batman comics, for lack of a better word. And
when we look at some of the speakers here and some of the topics I was just going through, it's like Batman and villainy, Batman psychology, philosophy, Batman and technology, which obviously he's always been equipped with powers beyond the average person. And as you said, the 60s, Batman, James Bond, that sort of thing. But there's always been a lot of technology, the Batmobile, the Batcave, the whatever, that sort of thing, which again was of the 50s and the 60s. That viewing forward, the way we were going to live in the future.
Well, it's interesting too, because it really is kind of highlights an aspect that we cover in popular culture, which is the icon in popular culture, and there is no other greater vehicle icon than the Batmobile. And actually, we've got a fellow coming from Fort Wayne, Indiana, who makes Batmobiles for very
Very
wealthy
rich guys.
Very rich
clients.
people, very wealthy clients.
Actually, and so it's kind of neat that again, what we wanted to do was just basically create an opportunity for academics and also fans to be able to share their interests and knowledge and enthusiasm for Batman and popular culture. So going off of what you mentioned in terms of the topics, it might seem like it's all over the place, but the underlying theme is Batman.
Yeah, the way it living, basically part of our lives. Yeah,
right. And some of our speakers they're interested in the Batman world, but they're specifically looking at Batgirl or any of the various Robins or any of the villains. There's lots of interest in those particular characters. There's going to be a Batwoman TV series starting later this year in the fall. And back in the 1950s, they added Batwoman because there were some concerns that Batman and Robin were maybe there were some homosexual undertones in some of the stories, so they added Batwoman, sort of proved that he was straight. And now Batwoman in the comics is a lesbian who was kicked out of the army for Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
Yeah.
So it's come full circle.
Full circle. Yeah. Well, and then you had the various villains were men and women. You had Catwoman. You had the Penguin. You had as you said, Frank Gorshin as the Joker in that crazy green whatever that was with all the the Riddler. I'm thinking of Riddler.
Mark,
But and then the characters in the movies, of course, are a different breed too. But again, that was targeted at a different audience, not the '60s camp audience, but a dramatic movie audience, an action movie audience.
And that's exactly right. You know, in the old days, it would be considered, I don't want to say slumming, but now it's a way to reach an audience for older established stars to play these villains. So you do get people like Jack Nicholson or
Arnold Schwarzenegger,
or someone like we had Eva Marie Saint play Superman's mother years ago.
Right.
So you get or Michael Caine, Oscar-winning actor, playing Alfred the Butler.
Right.
Where is someone his age going to reach a mass
that
demographic?
Audience. Sure. And that's interesting because in some cases, they didn't have to recruit people. They said, hey, if you're doing this movie, I'd like to be in it. What can I do? That sort of thing. That's the level of popularity.
That's right.
When you look at this too, I was interested about the fact that Michael Barr is going to talk about Batman and political and social theory a little bit. And you mentioned the fact that he was a writer. Was Batman ever a political person at all? I didn't sense that from in a lot of ways, but there must be a little bit of that somewhere.
Sometimes. Batman wasn't as overtly political as some of the other characters have been over time.
Right.
He was involved in selling war bonds, and some of the serials in the 1940s were sort of very anti-Japanese during the war. But for example, they stayed away from him discussing Vietnam or anything that was sort of controversial. In the 60s. Right. But other characters were more political than Batman has been.
Right. Well, and it's funny because Batman sort of operated out, he was a crime fighter. He was against the bad guys, the bad women, whatever. But he operated outside of the regular system. So in a weird way, he was sort of a vigilante. He was kind of anti-establishment, but good anti-establishment, I guess.
It was. I mean, again, another aspect that we deal with in popular culture is mythology. And so again, it's like he's sort of like the anti-hero almost to some degree. Anti-hero, and then you also have the mythology of good versus evil, of course, and kind of, what side does Batman fall on? Because it's, to some he could be considered evil because he's kind of going outside of the law. But
he's breaking the laws in some ways, but for the right reasons.
Exactly.
Most of the time.
Exactly.
And one of the things, I'm teaching a course on comics and superheroes at the moment, and a lot of the students have said that they like Batman because he's a superhero without superpowers. So technically, you could become Batman if you had enough money and time and did enough push-ups. You could be Batman. And so he's relatable in a way that someone like Superman or Captain America or the Hulk just aren't.
Yeah, because he relies on technology, relies on the laws of
his
physics.
brain and brawn.
Right.
Yeah. There's no like leaping tall buildings or stopping locomotives, that kind of stuff. Unless he's got the right thing.
That's
his
right.
bat belt.
He always does, right?
When you look at the audience you're expecting at the conference, a broad spectrum of people? Is that what you're thinking?
We really did.
Yeah.
We wanted to reach a wide audience, both young and old, and that's why we wanted to, have a few different events going on. We have Mark Sumerak at the Wood County Public Library that might be more geared towards the youth and the youth interest in terms of developing comics or having an interest in comics and having an interest in getting into the comics industry. But then also in terms of from an academic side, then we have somebody like Dr. Jeff Browne, who's written extensively on comics and comic book characters in popular culture and others.
Right, and I shouldn't be surprised, but I guess I was a little bit, that the comic book reader stereotype is just this kind of nerdy guy or whatever. But it's men and women, it's people from every race and group and all over the world. They've become fans of this character, and very few popular culture figures last that long. So someone where your grandmother knows who Batman is, and your grandchildren will know who Batman is. He's just sort of seeped into the culture.
Well, when we come back, let's talk a little bit about talk about Batman versus some of the other superheroes, because there's always the, well, my superhero's better. Batman, there's nothing going on there. We'll be back in just a moment with Dr. Chuck Coletta and Dr. Matt Donahue. We're talking about the Batman and Popular Culture Conference at Bowling Green State University. Back in just a moment. Thanks for staying with us around the Journal. We're talking about Batman and popular culture, an event going on at Bowling Green State University April 12th and 13th. Jerome Library, the main base of operations, and you folks have brought in some things, and one of the engineers here at the station brought in. But this is an example of some of the artwork and some of the things that you'll see on display in the Jerome Library during this. But it's a little tough to read all this. But this was a $1 poster, and it's got lots of flashy words like 6 spine-tingling episodes, 3 supersized pinups, but it's an example of the Batman character in art, because a lot of this, as you guys have talked about, it isn't just movies, it isn't just television, it's all of the visual things and all of the collectibles that go with it, and the university and what you're going to have at the conference, a lot of items like this for people to look at.
We will. We're really thrilled to be working with the Browne Popular Culture Library, and they have such an extensive collection of not only comic books, but also ephemera. And they've got a number of display cases that will have a lot of Batman artifacts and items in them, not only at the Browne Popular Culture Library, located at the 4th floor of Jerome Library, but also on the 1st floor. There's a number of display cases as well that is going to be all things Batman. And it's really exciting because it's, again, as we've all talked about today, it's really amazing to think about all of the different ephemera and artifacts that have come out of just from this little character. So again, it's a great example of what we deal with in popular culture, this whole idea of a media convergence, if you will, going from printed form to television form and theatrical productions and so on.
Toothpaste and soap dispensers and Band-Aids
and little
and
Batman
action
cars
figures
and
everything. And video games. I mean, it's just endless, the merchandise.
Yeah, the merchandising. Now, one of the things and we mentioned this earlier too, that Batman's a superhero. And you said, but he's a more relatable superhero because he's just a regular person who happens to have a lot of really good technology at his disposal. How does he play off? How do people view him versus like a Superman versus some of the other big character superheroes like that?
Well, there's always the controversy, Batman versus Superman and that sort of thing. But he's one of the top ones up there. Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, Captain America, Wonder Woman, and so on.
And I think he's very relatable. The origin, every kid who's heard that origin about the parents walking down the street and being gunned down, and that's relatable to when you're a kid, because you're afraid something might happen to your parents, and what happened. And so that's a story that once you hear it, you never forget it. And people do understand Batman. That could be me, and I don't want that to happen. And he might be a dark vigilante, but he has a good purpose. He doesn't want that ever to happen to anybody else again.
Yeah, and he lives life experiences that you may live or hope to avoid living, I guess. Too,
What's also interesting too is that the villains associated with Batman also have their own sort of backstories, existence as well, and also their own sense of popularity. The Joker, the Riddler, the Penguin, Mr. Freeze, and so on. It's interesting to see that not only is there this sort of attention and hype around Batman and Robin, but also how the villains also themselves are iconic in their own right.
Right. For example, Julie Newmar's Catwoman outfit from the 60s, that's in the Smithsonian today.
Right.
And one of the biggest sellers is Harley Quinn, which is sort of the Joker's girlfriend. They're making a movie of her right now, and you see lots of Harley Quinns at Halloween and at various Comic-Cons and things. So the villains are popular too.
Yeah. We've got about 60 seconds. Is there a favorite villain or character that either one of you have from the series? Somebody like, oh, this is my favorite. You know, if I had to pick one villain, this is the one I'd like to. Yeah.
You know, I guess for me, really, my favorite was the Batman movie from the 1960s because it had all the villains.
All of them were it. Sure.
It had the Riddler, the Joker,
Penguin,
Catwoman, and so on.
Yeah.
That one, that for me was the iconic one.
I think the Joker is got to be one of the top villains in comics of all time. There's something about a scary clown that I think is psychological.
It just never ends.
I still don't like clowns.
Yeah. Good. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Matt Donahue, Dr. Chuck Coletta, Bowling Green State University's Department of Popular Culture, and the conference is Batman in Popular Culture. It's April 12th and 13th. Activity at the Jerome Library, Pallister Conference Room. Thank you so much for coming on and bringing all this stuff in and talking about it. Always good for us to kind of live through some of these things that have been a big part of our lives, and you guys are always so good at bringing that out. So appreciate that very much.
Thank you very much.
You can check us out at WBGU.org, and of course you can watch us every week here on WBGU-TV Public Television. We'll see you again next time.